you. 'Cause even me.
Yeah, sometimes, many times, a lot of times, men feel alone. And welcome to my Mental Health Matters this beautiful Saturday afternoon. Welcome, welcome. Please say hello if you're in. Mike, I see you. Welcome in. For those who haven't agreed to that StreamYard thing, I'm sorry I can't see your name. So please agree to it so that I can see your name on here. And on that note, welcome with me, my special guest, Mr. Collins. Collins is here, Collins J Jenkins. He is one of those men speaking up, saying something about what men are going through. And I found him on YouTube. You won't believe me. When I was just getting to know more about men. And I saw that he's been doing a lot of wonderful things about men out there, trying to empower men, trying to let men speak up. I enjoyed the session that I watched. I reached out to him to see, would you come and talk to my wonderful group about what men are going through so that we get the message from men to men, and not just any man, a man that is already working and listening to other men. And he said yes. And I'm honored to have him here with us today. Welcome, Collins. Thanks for agreeing to be here.
Thank you, and hello to your wonderful audience as well.
Yes, I do have a wonderful audience. Thanks for saying that. I do have a wonderful audience. So, okay, today it's Man Cave Revelation. And I called it that because you created this man cave kind of setting, this joint. I called it a joint for men to come together. It's not like a therapy place, but it is being a therapeutic platform for other men. And you're going to tell us more about it. But before we
Sure.
go to that, can you tell us how all this came about?
Okay, so it's quite of a interesting story. A couple of years ago, unfortunately, we had a situation in my country. I'm from Antigua and Barbuda, wonderful country, 365 beaches. Come on down. But we had an unfortunate situation, which is not common here. Let me take out my glasses just to make sure people don't see the glare from the glass. Hopefully, I can see.
Yeah.
But we had a series of assaults against women, and it was actually very terrifying. We had several cases in a very short space of time, and for a population that's 100,000 persons, for a landmass of 108 square miles, you can imagine how horrific that was. The women galvanized themselves and formed an awareness platform, and they started to do a series of talks and theatrical presentations. Some persons would be aware of it. There's something called the Vagina Monologues, and within the Vagina Monologues, they had certain topics where they deal about abuse, rape, issues that they face, unfair treatment, etc. And I was in the audience. My wife participated as part of the production crew. And as I sat there listening, I felt a sense of urgency, a sense of responsibility that I needed to at least do something in my little part of the world to see how we can combat this scourge that we were facing at the time. You see, because it's not just a man's issue at that moment when women are expressing that they're going through these things. I have a mom. Men have daughters, we have sisters, we marry, we have spouses, and so it affects us, it affects them, and vice versa. So I reached out to the persons who organize the productions, which are good friends of mine, and I said, hey, I'm not familiar with a lot of persons, and this was a while ago, who may be open to this idea that I have, but I wanted to do something not to be a response to or to compete with women and their advocacy, but to complement. And so I was given a series of names of persons. Some I knew casually, some I had no idea about. And I reached out to them and said, are you open to this idea that I have to raise awareness around how we can be better men, be better persons be better individuals. And it was around that time that at the International Men's Day that was being promoted that a lot of people here didn't hear anything about. So they said, sure, we are willing to at least sit down and listen to what you have planned. And so it became something that was quite organic. We use an article that I shared with you that spoke to things that men face that are not usually covered in the media at that time. And we said, okay, so what are the things here that you feel passionate about? So over a series of years, every time that International Men's Day, we would raise awareness, we would have discussions about things that we are facing. And quite interestingly, in the whole effort of doing that, we recognized that it was quite therapeutic for each other to have these real discussions about the issues that we were facing and how we felt about them in an environment that we considered a safe space. And that gave birth to the Male Empowerment Network, whereby we help each other out, but not just only from a physical standpoint, but from a mental support standpoint. And then we were able to raise awareness around various issues that one time we had some videos on YouTube. We've engaged in media several years over. We've raised awareness as relates to International Men's Day. And we've had some very tough conversations in the media about what we're facing. And so the Male Empowerment Network was born.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. So, when you shared the article with me, and then I saw the topics that you used as the icebreaker, depression in men, violence, paternity issues, anxiety, a number of them that we talked about, education, wages, the domestic abuse that men were going through. Now, tell me, were men responsive to that call, and how did you go about bringing men together? I heard you some people from those who organized that thing, the program, the Vagina Monologue, you reached out to them, they helped you pass the word out. So were men really coming in, and what was the setting like?
The response was pretty good. I don't think anyone that I asked if they were willing or open to it refused. They were very open to it because of the intent behind of it. The idea wasn't to go on television or social media or Instagram and Twitter to say that, hey, I'm doing something. It was an activity in which we had a safe space, something that is private, that we can have a conversation. And from there, we can decide what sort of programs and interventions in our own way that we were able to launch. The setting is pretty much your living space. It was my living room. I invited the persons in my living room. They came in. My wife was very supportive of it. We had the opportunity to sit and speak from about 7 to 12 in the evening whenever we do have meetings. We would have light refreshments. So the idea wasn't a beer drinking contest. We just had a little thing so that we didn't go too hungry because you're doing a lot of talking.
Yeah.
But it was a comfortable environment where it was away from praying eyes and there was no judgment. And so it was very, very open, and we benefited a lot from it, the individuals who participated. And so I decided that although I didn't plan for it to happen that way, I found the results were quite remarkable. And I decided to share the model itself with the public of Antigua, and it was well received.
So it's now on a larger scale, and you told me you started with about 12 people, and now it's beyond your living room, I guess.
No, it's still a living room. They wouldn't move from the core of the living room. That's like the birthplace, the quote unquote, as you would say, the man cave. Although it's not a man cave, it's my wife's living room as mine. Yeah. But the idea here is not to have a huge forum with 500 and 600 persons just to have a conversation. It loses its support system, I find. When you were talking about persons who are recovering from PTSD or substance abuse, you generally have intimate settings for them to have conversations. And we didn't want to move away from that. What we did is share the model that we found to be beneficial for men in a culture where we are not accustomed to talking about our issues. But we do have open forum days where we invite persons who are not normal attendants so that they can see what we're trying to do and hopefully replicate it. And there are instances where we organize much larger town hall talks with men ever so often, like maybe once a year or so. I would have shared with you when the American University of Antigua and Barbuda had an open forum for men, and they invited other persons beside myself to be speakers.
Okay, so can you tell me some of the issues that came up? Not specific to anybody, but so what are some of those issues that men would normally not talk about or go to a therapist to share that came up during this group talk?
Okay, so what happens when we have discussions? It's sort of a mutual understanding with everyone that the information that we're sharing with each other is quite sensitive and quite private. And at times, you don't necessarily want to discuss too much in depth about individual experiences because we live in such a small society and the group is well known. Some person may be able to figure out what the story is and who is exactly sharing the story. But suffice to say, a lot of the issues we do discuss has to do with navigating what is expected to us right now as men in our society. The narrative has changed, and so we are still learning behavior and trying to be the better versions of ourselves. I'll give you an example personally. So in Antigua and Barbuda, and growing up, especially if you have elderly parents, they use certain words such as dear, sweetheart, love, honey. It's given as a form of affection sometimes. And we had to sort of relearn that some women, in certain contexts, do not like men referring to them that way, even though your intent is not to belittle them. Sometimes it comes out, all right? You're one of them. All right.
I don't like it.
Okay, so we at times have difficulty in navigating some of these things because I actually posted the question on my social media platform, which has a lot of discussions that take place from time to time. And the question was, how do you feel if a man refers to you as dear? And it was interesting the results I got. Women were sort of half and half with being for or against it. I think a lot of the times, especially now, what we find happening is we are not necessarily, or we may be in a situation where we're having a bit of difficulty communicating. Men sometimes can be a bit blunt, open. They may say something and, it may come across the wrong way. And we need to give each other space to understand the intent behind what you're saying and not necessarily what words you're using, right? And sometimes a person may say, yes, miss, and the miss is actually a belittling miss based on her body language and her tone and so on. And somebody may say dear with all of the best of intentions. So one of the issues we tackle with is how to communicate without being offensive, because at times we feel like if we are walking in a minefield, and rather than say anything and be misinterpreted, or say anything and then we get a response instead of trying to understand the core of what we're trying to say, we shut up. And for a lot of persons, it can be very frustrating because here you are asking us to talk to you, to communicate. And when we do, before we actually get out and have the chance to say what we're saying and explain, and maybe you trying to understand the core of where we're coming from, it's about semantics. It's about, oh, you didn't use the right terminology, or you don't understand how to speak to people. So you shut off. That's one of the issues. Okay. The other issue, you wanted to come in?
No, I was just going to say, okay, that isn't relating to female, but for males, the issue of communicating what they are going through, why is it so difficult? And I'm guessing in your setting they open up about issues like domestic violence that like we talked about, but the statistics is low generally out there that men are going through domestic violence. Another thing you mentioned earlier is that we're talking about the serial rapist that you had then in the community and how you dealt with it and what women were going through. And men are the one perpetrating all this, ill behaviors. Why is it difficult for men to seek professional help?
You said something very interesting, which I think we need to explore.
Okay.
The men are the ones committing these atrocities.
Right.
But the programs and social programs we have that dealing with them at the root isn't there.
Right. I agree.
So it needs to be a two-pronged approach, in my opinion. You need to supply the support and the protective mechanisms for the women, but equally, you need to look at addressing the root of the problem. And if you don't have the programs, even if they are the lower majority of the person suffering from it, then you're going to have an issue. Essentially, you're mopping up the floor, but you're not finding the leak. You're not dealing with the leak. And so at times, this now manifests itself when you're having conversations, not just with our core, but with general open forums, that they don't think that any effort or interest is being placed on dealing with them, because as it's seen on a wider scale, they don't have any problems significant enough to warrant it. You see the problem? So again, it's a situation where they're like, why bother? Like, okay, let me just try and do my thing and survive as I can. And then it goes over into other areas, as when you start talking about child custody.
So men feel ignored, and so they're staying quiet.
Yeah, they'll talk to their best friend. They'll talk to their brethren. They may go to the barber shop, and some of it comes out. But generally, it's not dealt with. And so I think that is indicative to the statistics that speaks to men would likely go through with a suicide attempt over a woman, while a woman is likely to think about it more.
Right.
We actually go through it and actually commit it at a higher rate than our female counterparts.
Which is an indication that we have a higher prevalence of depression in men than what the statistics are showing. So they're not talking. Now the issue is, okay, well, you answered. They're not talking because they feel ignored. The programs are not addressing the root. But now, if men would only or most likely open up to another man, why aren't more men coming out to do stuff to support other men?
Culture. It is seen as a weakness when you are not strong. We are trained into trying to understand if you're a Christian or religious household, you tend to think the man is at the apex. And I'm going to share a story with you. So I'm quite a person on social media who share a bit of my family life from time to time. And at times I talk about it on television or the media whenever we have interviews. And I remember going into a hardware store and one of the guys there saw me and he said, I couldn't do what you do. I said, what do you mean? He said, this thing with your house husband, not me. I could never do that. And I became, quote unquote, working from home and taking care of the little one that we share with my wife, because when the pandemic came around, the normal 8 to 5 that I had, the company had to release me. I'm also an entrepreneur as well, so I transitioned into the other part of what I do. But for the relationship, it worked with me being home and he having to do online schooling. So I got goodbye, honey. Bobby, enjoy a good day, because she has to leave. She's a pharmacist, so she went out, and I was home with him all day. So I shared the experiences, and I'm like, well, I have to get the house clean before she gets back home and asks me, what am I doing? get the cooking done and all that kind of stuff. And he said, no, for him, he feels as if he would have been lesser of a man to be in that position. And I said, but what if your wife is sick? What if your girlfriend is ill? What do you do? And interestingly, there were older women around that conversation who said they could never be with a man who's not out working. You understand? So imagine you're in a situation during a pandemic where you were a pilot who was flying around the world and you were doing really well, and all of a sudden the airline crashed and you're home with the kids and your wife is working. That deals a major blow to your ego. And if you are of that mindset that you can't be flexible, or this is about the family and not about my ego, you can see how you start to feel lesser of a man. And if you don't have a supportive spouse, that you can see how that then leads to another bunch of problems. And if you don't have then the support system to say, hey, listen, John, I understand, I have the same situation, then you feel as if you're less than a man, because the society dictates that you need to pull your weight, you need to earn a certain amount, you need to, instead of saying what is best for the relationship at the time. And that can be frustrating to men, and they want to talk about it. But again, if they don't have the support system and the space to do so, it's a problem.
It's a problem. Well, I mean, on this note, I think I should say that, please, if you are a man like Colin, that you don't mind starting a platform to have men talking, because this is so deeply rooted. If somebody walked up to you and said, I can't do what you're doing, that is just one issue on its own. Then how would men really fit into this transition of how would they be able to transition into being able to seek help or seeing themselves as whole without, whenever anything is not the way the society expects it or the way they've been conditioned to think about it. So I if you're a man out there, please consider starting a platform where men can come and express themselves and bring these issues to light, so that we can at least see different sides and talk more about what works for the family or what works for the community than the masculinity thing. Okay, so we had an interesting conversation, behind we had this interesting conversation. And I want to relate this to men don't have the typical symptomatic manifestation like women do when it comes to some mental health issues, like anxiety and depression. Depression manifests differently in men. Most times, we see anger, we see irritability. Men would even show more physical symptoms like backache, like headache, like, they complain of something that has to do with the body other than saying anything that has to do with the brain or the mind, like maybe they're feeling depressed, and we see them being more aggressive. The same goes for anxiety. And I told you that my focus is in narrowing down to men, executive men, and what they're going through. Because if a man in a family, for example, even a child, a son, is not feeling okay, or there's something going on, it affects the whole of the family. And they're the ones that most people in the family are looking up to help support the rest of the family. And then you went into something describing how symptoms of a mental illness can manifest differently. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, so what I've found is, thankfully now, especially even in where I'm from, the whole topic behind mental illness is more spoken about. We just had a forum recently on television talking about that from a male's perspective, which was really well received. The problem is when you're depressed, you think you're fine. You think you're fine. Sometimes you don't know how it's manifesting itself, because my wife is a pharmacist, so she was explaining to me that there's something called functional depression, where you go to work normal and you think if somebody's observing you, think that everything is okay, but you're not. So a couple of years ago, not a couple, several years ago actually, I was this kind of person. I still am, but I've kind of relaxed a bit, who was trying to make sure that I got everything right and really a go-getter and trying to build a career for myself and so on. So it sort of ties into the sort of executive mindset. And I didn't realize that I was suffering from anxiety. So how did I know I was suffering from anxiety? Whenever intimacy came up, believe it or not, I found a situation where the length of time during intimate sessions was very short. And I started to think, no, something's going on here. There's nothing wrong with the merchandise. There's nothing wrong with the merchandise, but it was just some very short sessions and wasn't in my mind wasn't natural. So I then started to get a bit more depressed. And a couple of years after that, I read up on it, and then I had the courage to say, hey, look, I don't really care what anybody says here. I'm going to have to try and go to therapy and see what's really going on, because this may probably affect future relationships.
It took you years to seek help?
Yeah. Again, because it's the whole mindset that you need to try and work through it. You need to try and suck it up. You need to figure it out yourself because you're a man. And then I just put all of that aside and said, look, I don't come from a culture where therapy is normal. When you hear you're going to therapy, here is actually found on when I was growing up, like they thought you were crazy, not realizing that therapy is a natural part of things. So while I had the opportunity when I was studying to go to therapy, I went to a psychiatrist and she evaluated me. She said, you're suffering from anxiety. I was like, what? 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 I feel fine. I operate, and in school I get everything done. I sleep normal. I eat normal. She said, no, believe it or not, your body's under a lot of tension and it's manifesting itself sexually. I was like, wow. So I had to go through years of therapy. And then I stumbled on Tai Chi. And then that whole thing where you see the Oriental people go outside on the lawns and do the body movement and so on. That's not just for the movies. That's not just for Oriental people. That's for everybody. Yoga and Tai Chi sort of have the same principles. And I learned that my body was indeed under a lot of tension. Like when I spoke to my Sifu, he said to me, he's on the phone, you know. I'm on the other side of the phone. And he said to me, drop your stomach and your shoulder. I was like, what do you mean? He said, sit back, drop your stomach and your shoulders. And you know what happened? I felt like a weight came off my shoulders. So I was like this.
You didn't, yeah.
Right? All the time, every day. Because the posture, you know, you guys.
It's a man.
Thing, you know?
Shoulders up.
Just drop everything. And I was like, wow, that was a simple thing, you know. And then I started to do series of exercise. I used to practice a bit of martial arts before, but it was a rigid type. Now I dealt with the softer side. And I started to understand the importance of breathing, of relaxation, of deep breathing, but not just any type of breathing. Understand how breathing works, the body movements. And then you start to see a lot of patterns between religion and exercise and these sort of philosophies. Like when people pray, what it is they do, right? When you, for example, even sexual activity, when there's relaxation, the performance that this needs, or sort of it generates within a relationship, understanding energy. And before you know it, I started to get better, way better. Like I started to know. It was incredible. But ordinarily, you would think that this thing, you know, is for people way out there. And I share the story because it's not that I don't have shame, you know. I can't feel embarrassed, but it doesn't make sense if you've gone through something as traumatic as it was for me, and I made it to the other side, that I'm going to cross the river, get to the other side, and see you coming behind of me and allow you to drop in. Right. No, I'm going to tell you where to walk. And I'm pretty open, so I speak about my issues and what I went through and how I dealt with it, to kind of give guys an idea that you may not be in a place to say anything because you don't feel comfortable to, but hey, there's someone who may have, and this is his story, so that at least it gives you something to think about.
Yeah. Okay. So, on that note of intimacy, let me bring up these issues, like sexual dysfunction. A lot
Yeah.
of men are going through it. I was talking to someone the other day and she told me, hey, with mental health, men's mental health, at least that even erectile dysfunction is now more, it's now more accepted, or people are now seeking more help than it used to be before, that we're hoping men's mental health will get to that state as well. Well, I'm not really sure if men still seek help. I mean, if they seek more help for erectile dysfunction now. But imagine a man having issues with intimacy. If the wife brought it up, that can become an issue. It can become an ego thing.
Yeah.
And then let's say that led to domestic violence. This woman is being abused, or you think, hey, I'm not man enough for you because of this. There's underlying shame, there's underlying anxiety, there are issues going on there. But we have the shame and the fear of speaking out and seeking help leading to more issues in men. And then
Definitely.
it can then go ahead to become where the man is trying to cope, and we have this maladaptive coping where they turn to alcohol or turn to pornography or turn to substance psychoactive substance dependency. These things can escalate. At what point do you think that we really need to address it for men? Is it individual issues? Everybody should take up this issue individually, or you think we need societal or community reorientation first?
It's a bit of both, and I'll explain why. I'm glad you mentioned some of the things you did because this is going to be great. When I was growing up and I got introduced to my body in terms of hormones, sexual reproduction, and all of that, I got a book. I literally got a book. My mom at the time, God bless her, she didn't know much of how to bridge this kind of conversation with me. She's much more older than, in terms of, I was the last child of four, and she came from a humble household, so she didn't have the tools to talk about sex with me. So she gave me a Christian book, and that was it in the conversation. She doesn't know if I understood what I read. She just decided, look, you can read and you can write, here's a book. And that was it. You see, the problem is we are totally fine with our children watching cartoons, with them boxing it out with each other. But the minute someone kisses or embraces, hey, 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 cover your eyes, don't look at that kind of thing. Because we tend to believe that if they're exposed to sex, if they're exposed to intimacy, they're going to try it. I'll say this in return. If you don't tell them about it, when they experiment, chances are it could go pretty much the way you don't want, rather than they understanding so they can deal with the risk because you've equipped them with the tools to do so. So what ends up happening is that, especially for men, we may have the wrong concept of what sex and intimacy should be. We turn to guys on the block, we turn to the pornography. We think that intimacy is having sex for an hour or an hour or 2 hours, you're not doing anything. So you then turn to supplements that you shouldn't be drinking. There's false expectations as to what's involved. So there's a whole area of that education that's not present. And we need to be real about it. We need to introduce it in schools in a way that it is real, because we're doing our young people a disservice. And even some of us have a wrong and false expectation as to what it entails. So when you juxtapose that to what are expected of men, I'm telling you point blank, regardless of how thug life you think a guy is, in the back of his head, when he drops his pants, he's thinking as whether or not how you're going to accept him. And he may seem like a jerk, but how they do in terms of protecting themselves is, I don't care. They put up that facade. That's their shield. If I don't care, you can't hurt me. And so they put that up, and the person comes across as not sensitive and so on. But it's a mechanism that they use to protect themselves psychologically, because they don't quite know what to expect, or they have a false expectation of what it should be, and it manifests itself that way.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So leading to when a woman says something about you're not satisfying me or there's something wrong, why would they? I mean, should things like this lead to domestic violence? And on the other way around, if domestic violence is going on and the man is a victim, why would I mean? What should they do?
You see, the thing is, you have to understand that there's something called sexual compatibility and incompatibility. Some people are just not your fit. And it's the truth. And you cannot please everyone the same way. So we need to be real with each other with relationships, and we need to determine what is the deal breaker with relationships. And we respectfully as well, we need to sort of deal with it with a sort of gentle touch. There are situations where the performance is not what you expect, and the man himself may not be open to talking about it because he doesn't know how to handle it, because he's shameful, right? And so that's the situation. I'll give you a personal joke. I remember I had a brief encounter with a woman one time, a couple of years ago. Well, when it was long ago. Let me caveat that, long ago. And it was around the time I was going through my issue and my therapies and so on. And I got word back that the girl called me a cock spray to the rest of her friends. Now,
Really?
yes. So you can handle that a couple of ways. You can go and confront her, which can turn very nasty. Or you can decide, listen, let me try and deal with positive energy and work on me. So there's always that issue where you would be tainted in public about who you are and your performance and all that. And so when guys talk about that, like I said, some of them, the way they deal with it, they just decided they don't care what happens with the outcome. They just think about themselves. So there needs to be equal understanding and that space for them to sort of be open about certain things. I'll give you one further. If you listen to the music in the entertainment world, I can call some of the songs out. I don't want a 1 minute man. My goodness.
Nobody wants a 1 minute man. You don't want a 1 minute woman as well.
Well. I mean, listen, and that's what I'm saying. Intimacy is different for everybody. And for some people, 5 minutes is enough. And for others, they need 30 minutes. And for others, it's a lot of foreplay. And for others, they don't mind. It depends. It can't be a one size fit all because each of us are individuals. But we don't give our space that. And so just like you see on Instagram, where a lot of young people are having challenges, especially mental difficulties, because their profile is not being liked, their posts are not getting reshared, they're not being talked about because they're trying to fit an image that exists. For a lot of men, we suffer from that as well. And I reached a point in my life where I looked myself in the mirror and said, I have accepted me and all my shortcomings. It doesn't mean that you don't get better, but you accept yourself, you try and love yourself. And when you do that, you get comfortable and you don't have to be so fulfilling in getting all these societal praises and the group thinks and everybody trying to fit into these circles that you just maybe really not a part of. You get comfortable, you get to love yourself. And that is a beautiful thing, because when you do that, that's when you really shine. And that's when that energy now attracts people who like that and who falls within that category. So for me, at this point, coming on this forum and even talking as openly as I do, that's unheard of in
Right.
where I'm from. You
You,
don't find that happening at all. But I've reached that level of comfort.
yeah. I mean, you've come a long way. I can say that, and I think the more one gets into things like this, the better it gets, because then you start seeing more people relating to what you're saying and saying, "Oh, you know what? I'm not the only one," and that's really good. So thank you for doing what you're doing and sharing this part of you with us.
Mhm.
So I want to quickly touch this issue of maladaptive coping. I was just in a program this morning organized by Comfort Foundation. It's a foundation that talks about suicide, prevention. And she mentioned something. One of the things that we will say when the speakers were talking, they said something about anger. Anger is as a result of loss of power. That people, when people lose power, they try to catch up. I mean, to make up for it, or to put on that, facade, like you said, with anger. And a lot of men are angry, and a lot of men are, unleashing this anger on women, or maybe even on fellow men. And we talked about violence when we were discussing earlier this morning. How can men understand that when anger is the problem, or a lot of the things that they're doing are to hurt the people around them, is probably because they have something going on with them, and that seeking help might be a good idea.
I remember reading an article that spoke to the number of support groups that exist in the United States. It's a data, and I think persons listening can look it up as well. And it was startling, the actual number of them that exist for men in comparison to women. And I'm not talking about the support groups for PTSD for veterans. No, I'm talking about just support groups for men. I think it was one or two to how many hundreds of thousands of almost millions of people that exist in the United States. So what that says is that they don't have the avenue to get the support they need, and they need pressure to be released, or else it's going to build up. I also follow a lot of YouTube documentaries. It's one of these hobbies of mine, especially when I'm washing up. I tend to watch a lot of documentaries to pass the time. And I found a very interesting theme running through a lot of some of the most prolific serial killers that the world has ever seen. And a lot of them, as boys, they had issues at home, and it was never ever sorted out. And then it then manifested and morphed into some very horrific methodologies and habits that wreaked havoc on both men and women in the society. And you get to understand that we need to provide a place where they can release and also talk and also get the help they need. And it's not just um, women saying, guys, it's okay, try and get help. It's also us persons that maybe I might be in a bit of better place. Whenever you see someone, you have a conversation, say, look, what's up today? How you doing? Checking on your guy, like, how are you doing? What's up? How's the family? How's everything? How's the job? If you want to talk, let's just chit chat, share, play sports, go gym together. I've done it over the years. Guys that were not in a great place and said, let's go work out together. Let's talk about what you want to do for the future. And stuff, as it got relaxed, stuff came out, and it works. I remember the most impactful thing that happened in my life was a young man who saw me practicing in the yard, and came down and said, listen, I want to learn martial arts. And I said, why? He said, to protect himself. I said, why? He said, well, I have plans to be the next biggest drug dealer, the drug lord out there. And he was dead serious. He came from a situation where that's what he knew. And I said, okay, let's talk about this. Let's try and find a better way. And over the years, it's a situation where he started to train with us. But in order to do some of these training, like getting into Tai Chi, you can't be angry. For fluidity, you can't be angry. For proper breathing and the stances and what it requires to do the movements, you can't be angry. And
Well,
we managed to reprogram his thinking. And he went back to school because he had dropped out of school. He finished his schooling. He started to get into IT. He does cybersecurity now. He managed to move on to get his black belt. He has a job. He has a girlfriend. And he's far away from the person he was years ago. So if you are, quote unquote, living better than someone, reach back your hand and at least one, because that one may just be the person that may come and rob you and your family later on in life.
right. So you're calling on men to reach out to other men and just help out. And this is a note where I want us to wrap things up. And I was going to ask how can men support other men? You just answered that. But maybe let me take it further. In what settings can men really seek out other men? Is it just start with your friend, call a friend and go out together, or is it as leaders? Because in my group, my Mental Health Matters group, we have a lot of leaders in that group. Even though we have only 30% of the members that are men, but the men that I have in the group are men of substance. I believe they can do something. One of the group members reached out to me. He's in Abuja and said, "Oh, from last week's topic or the show that I had, that he has an idea that he's thinking of having like a men therapy bar or something like that, have something like that." I told him to watch today's on because you have that experience and he might be reaching out to you for guidance on that. But where can men just sort out other men, and in what situations can other men capitalize on to help other men? Maybe just give us examples.
I don't think it should be a situation where men are reaching out to other men, because
Men don't
you
like
know, yeah, I don't like that. I don't think it's a situation where you want to be like you're actively going for persons. I don't think that may be the best solution. Again, it's a situation where, just like what we did on YouTube, where we have the conversations for men, by men, to men, and you put it out there, and eventually, and I've found that happening in my case, guys will reach out. My mom believed in something which I think is crucial to all of this, and that is you live by example. If you do what you need to do in the right way you need to do it, you inspire people around you. You would never know how much people are paying attention and saying, look, okay, he did it, so it's possible, until you actually mess up. When you mess up, you find people coming to you and say, look, I really looked up to you and you let me down, or I feel betrayed, or I feel ashamed, or if you fail, I feel like I can't do this. So it's not just about reaching out and having all these forums, and it's about living the talk, walking the talk. Then, like, you actually live in. Let them see how you deal with your family. Let them see how you deal with the children, how you deal with matters, how you deal with bullying and all of that. That accompanying having forums where, if there's a situation that there's a sort of like a reach out group that somebody's having a problem, and you can recommend them to more professionals, that is also good. But a lot of this takes the friends of the friends, or your buddies, or your pals, or your homeboys, to actually from time to time having real conversations about deep things that matter to them, like where do you see yourself in a couple of years, how do you feel about your family, how do you be someone that your children can come up to be the same person. That's fundamentally a question that I like to think about a lot. Are you comfortable with your child being exactly like you? And if the answer to that deep down and truly is no, then you know you have to try and fix something, right? So it's a series of things, not one answer. it's a combination of things. Yes, we need the support groups. Yes, we need forums that people can reach out to privately, but we also need to do our individual parts by A, living as best as we can, and B, being your brother's keeper. So you don't agree with them when you know it's wrong. Some of us are friends with people who are terrible people to other people, and we say nothing about it. We have to pull up each other and say, look, I don't agree with what you're saying or what you did. And this is why. I'm not perfect, but I'm telling you how this can have a knock-on effect. And let's talk about it. Let's reason about it. And if possible, let's get another perspective with someone who you trust. Let's have a conversation. So you trash things out.
Good, good. I mean, this has been very enlightening, and I mean, some of the key points that I took from all the things you told us is programming. Like when we're organizing things or planning programs to address women issues, we should stop mopping the floor without looking for the leak, right? We should do programs or come up with programs that would address the source of the issues, like programs that speaks to men. You also talk about the cultural acceptance or the cultural expectations of men. It's kind of a little bit too high and unrealistic, and the ripple effect is not a healthy one that we might want to look at as individuals and as community. Then education, you said we need to be intentional about the kind of education we're giving our boys and even children generally, to show them the right thing so that when they experiment, because we haven't told them what it's supposed to be, we don't have bad outcomes or unexpected terrible outcomes. So that is one. And there's something you said that struck me is that, men would not necessarily want people reaching out to them, but when the opportunity presents itself, the men around them should not let it slide. They should capitalize on it and use it as a means of changing a life, a family, and in some cases even a generation. Like the example you shared with us with the man that wanted to be a drug lord and turned out to be a cybersecurity personnel now. So thank you so much for coming on here. I would like you to please share the link to that your Facebook the series so that other men can go listen to what other men are doing. And maybe if you have, I don't know if you have other people that wants to come, or is this just an Antigua community thing, or is this something open to people from other parts of the world?
Well, like I mentioned, this whole male empowerment thing was purely organic, and we just decided to give it a name and just have a mutual understanding as to what it is. But it's like I said, for a culture like ours that's conservative, it was remarkable what happened because it wasn't heard of years before. And so it's just a matter of, hey, you trying it wherever you are, trying it and see how it works out. We have a Facebook page, the Male Empowerment Network, but it's not very active. Ever so often we put things in there. And like I said, it's not about having a lot of content, but more on a personal level, because we all have individual lives. And I'm not a therapist by profession. I'm not a psychologist. I didn't do psychology. I'm an architect. I'm a project manager. I'm a sustainable development consultant. So this is like totally left side for me. It just was something I saw happening that I said, let me just try and do something about it. And then it became what it is today. And I consider myself as a conduit to maybe ventilate some of the things that the guys are feeling, generally speaking, that they're not comfortable talking about. I would say some guys don't want to talk about it because they may have other skeletons in their closet. So if they speak on it, it becomes a situation of somebody starting to fling things in their face. Me, I don't care. I'm going to talk about it. So I would share it. And for instance, I'm a big proponent of paternity leave.
Yeah.
Because when my wife became pregnant, she got ill. I had to pull my weight, some serious weight. And sometimes you get tired and somebody asks you, how are you? No, I'm a person, if you ask me who I am, I'm going to tell you exactly who I am. I'm not going to say, okay, I'm fine. Not me. When I am not good, you're going to know. So when they say, how are you? I say, hey, listen, I'm dying. I'm tired. This is stressful. They're like, why are you tired? Why are you stressed out? You're not carrying the baby. Yeah? But when you're driving, going on the road, because you would have done everything, prepare the meals and deal with the laundry because they're ill, yeah, you're running off the road, it diminishes your contribution to the family. And when that child comes into the world and you have to work and they're at home, you don't understand what they're dealing with. You don't understand what postpartum depression is. And when they come home, when you come home and they give you the baby and you're tired, it becomes an argument. And then there's a clash, and then there's stress on the relationship. By the way, we did a research. Actually, the founder of my country's first think tank called Antigua Barbuda Council of Sustainable Development, co-founder. And we did two pieces of research. One in particular that's important was the divorce rate. In Antigua was very high, so I wanted to get to the bottom of why this is happening. And from the divorce research, I found out that a lot of relationships and marriages and cohabitation arrangements, they go south after children come into the picture. And one of the reasons are that there's not enough time for the couple to bond to the child because of the social situation. So a lot of the Scandinavian countries realize that this is a problem. The family unit is suffering. So they offer a lot more time off at the first stages of life for the baby. In Antigua, maybe you might get 2 weeks off as a man. So they don't really see your value to the relationship. And when that isn't there and there's the stress of the economics on the relationship, you can see how this become a multiplier effect.
Right.
There's quite a bit of single mom households in my country. So you see where this goes. Right. It starts from that's what I'm talking about, getting back to the source of the leak and not just upping the floor.
Yeah, things like policy, like the policy in workplaces and the government policy to make men to be more involved in child rearing and just being part of it. That is a
listen. It's a huge. I had a picture of my baby strapped to my back like I was one of a Chinese or Korean with a big hat out, hanging stuff on the line.
Yeah,
I played a huge part in my child's upbringing, big time. Mm-hmm. And we've formed such a strong bond between him and myself and his mom that we have a great relationship in terms of communication. And it's important that guys are given that space to do that. But sometimes it's difficult when the society is not oriented for that. And that's a major problem because you see, it's about the life cycle costs of not having these programs in place.
Right.
You understand? So you spend more on your social programs because they wasn't addressed to begin with. When you have a human resource in your office, you are making sure that you try and maximize their potential. But if the person is depressed, if the person is not functioning optimally, it affects your bottom line. So it's in your interest to make sure that the people that are working for you in terms of wellness are there.
You can say that again and again. because I have this conversation with HR people and with founders.
They don't understand. They don't get it. They
can't see it because it's not like bread and cookie that you say, hey, this is what you're getting and what you're not getting. There are a lot of people working out there that are not fulfilled, not satisfied, going through issues, and they come to work and they do whatever and go. We call that presenteeism. Presenteeism is when people show up to work, but their mind is not really there or they're not giving their work their best. So even though they're not calling in, even though they're there physically, the employer thinks that, they're working and this is what we can get. And they completely ignore the wellness, the mental health part of it. And the stigma is there and they're not talking about it. So they're making maybe 40% of what the person is able to do. And they don't pay attention to this. And a man whose wife is at home dealing with the child, is coming to work, not sleeping well, and all those things, and they're like, oh, you have to be back, your wife, you're not the one carrying the baby, like you said, and they're back at work, but the wife is calling, she's tired, or they get home, they're not getting intimate, everything is happening back at home, they come to work and they're not their best.
Yeah, and imagine that you are dealing with it psychologically and you don't have the tools to deal with it psychologically.
Yeah, well, I mean, you
open a can of worms.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a good one. It's a good one. And I want to say that, I thank the men in my group. When this group turned 1 year, we had a men's panel. And the men in the group, I was surprised at a lot of things that they brought up, like issues with the military, those in the armed forces, men, issues going on with men. And that was one of this topic we're doing today came out from the conversation we had when the men, some of the leaders, men leaders in the group that we had came to talk about it. On their panel, they raised a lot of issues, and we are here today. And today, again, you have raised so many other issues. Policy is one of it when we talk to leaders. We didn't touch religion today, but it is another huge part. I think you talked about it. But in all, I'm thankful that you responded to my request. You came here and you shared, you shared all that you can with us. You are a great resource to the world, a greater resource to men out there. And I hope that, people watching, men watching would learn from this. I'm actually hoping and optimistic that more men would rise from this conversation and decide to do something in their family, in their homes, and in the community to support other men and get the word out there. So
I just wanted to say one last word though, because I think it's important. I don't know how this conversation is too short, but I'll just say this.
I mean, go ahead. There are people watching, people are benefiting.
Okay, so I will say this. We are striving to be the better versions of ourselves in our society, but it's a deep-rooted issue. Have you seen what's happening in Afghanistan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there are many other examples like that. I spent time in the armed forces in my country before I went to university. So I have a first-hand understanding of how this thing works. So as long as we have conflict, let me repeat this. So as long as we have conflict, we're going to have these issues. Reason being, you are reprogrammed from a civilian to a soldier to respond in conflict a particular way. You can't have bullets flying all over your head and killing your mates next door and stay there and simply break down. Because at that point, you're then putting your entire squad at risk. And if the entire squad at risk, possibly your country would be at risk. So you have to shut off a part of your humanity in order to fight. And we have this deep-rooted expectation, and understandably so, that in a situation of a conflict, we give ourselves willingly to protect you, our women, and our children a chance to live. That has its own impact. And because we have wars and will continue to have conflicts in the foreseen future, men are going to suffer for it, and it's going to be something that we're going to have to grapple with immensely. Because some of the things that we suffer with are passed down through our DNA. We don't understand why we have such trouble with it. Some of these things pass through our DNA. Okay, they make us who we are. They are a carbon copy. Yeah, so that's something that you have to think about. Yeah.
Oh, Lord, thank you so much. We're going to have more next week. I'll be talking about addiction. We'll be talking about sexual addiction, alcohol, substance abuse. We are talking about addiction in men next week. Please, if you're a man, a woman watching out there, ask people to join us. Let's just know more. When we are enlightened, we're just we're better for ourselves and for the people around us. So I thank you once again for coming. We'll be reaching out to you. Now you are part of this group, and I just hope that you would be the great resource that you've been to everybody, to us in the group as well. And I think at some point we'll bring you back here. Please show our guests some love in the house. We thank you. I can see people saying thank you here already. Thank you so much, and God bless. We'll see you next week. I mean, I will see my guests next week. Thank you. I will still see you right now behind the
All
show.
right. Okay. Take care.
Yeah. Before we leave, my mental health matters. What about yours?
You're asking me that?